welcome to Stagehand, the show where we talk about things I learned while being a stagehand. Welcome to part 2 about me talking about wages and kind of the costs of working in the industry. If you didn't watch the first part where I talk about wages and expenses while working on tour, please go watch that. There's so much that I do not want to repeat because I just don't have the energy. This part I'm going to kind of talk about what it's like to work as a local and the gig side of it and when I'm not on like a regular schedule and just kind of average that out. Obviously I can't give any set amounts because of how like everywhere it is, and it really depends on month to month. In terms of how much I'm making, but the expenses stay pretty much the same every single month. So pretty much between mid-April and end of June this year, I was back in the whole working with my local kind of gig work thing, except I took a lot of time off because post-tour bed rot is a necessity. So I'm gonna kind of look at the like previous 2 years of me working with my local and kind of how much I made with that then. It's also really gonna depend on like which local you're working with. Like I work with a small 3-digit local that has less than 100 members in northeastern Wisconsin, so obviously there's gonna be a lot less work opportunities. Like before I went on tour, I would say yes to pretty much everything I had availability for. I couldn't say yes to everything though because I was a college student until last December, so I tried to build my college schedule kind of around work, but obviously it had its limits. And I was an apprentice for half of this time, and there's a different wage for apprentices versus journeymen, so the wage I make now is a little bit different than the wage I made back then. So this is a mess, but you know what? Let's just dig into it anyway. So I'm gonna really look at September through December of 2023 because that's kind of when I was doing a lot more work with my local than normal. And I would say that time frame kind of compares to what it would be like to work with them when you're not in college. Okay, so every single month I made literally anywhere between $0 in the month, or I think my highest that I made was $2,255. In September, I didn't make anything, but I also didn't take any work in September, so duh. In October, I made $761.67. November, I made $2,255.80. And in December, I made $1,870.06. So a lot of differences there in how much I'm making. Big reason for that is that I would really only do ins and outs because I wasn't high enough on the dispatch list in October. And then in November, when Pretty Women came through, I got thrown onto a week of show calls and wardrobe, so that kind of bumped things up a lot. And the same thing kind of happened in December with Beetlejuice. I got thrown onto hair for a week of show calls, so that also bumped things up as well. I also had a week of working the Nutcracker in November, so that kind of helped with those November wages. During this time, I didn't do any work with Local 18 or Local 251. Sometimes I'll make the hour and a half, 2 hour drive to Milwaukee or Madison just to add on to my income, just a little tiny bit. So like, is it possible to really make a full-time wage with working with Local 470? No, it's definitely not, unless if you're kind of at the top of the A-list. But if you have a car and you're okay with driving, you can make a livable wage if you add on Local 251 and Local 18 and kind of just combine the 3 locals. Or if you just move to Milwaukee or Madison and just do occasional work in Green Bay, because we don't get as much work as those places do. But it was great in college because I was still making more than an on-campus job, and the schedule was a lot better with my class schedule, and it was really great because I can go through an apprenticeship while going through college and get my journeyman status pretty much the same time that I graduated college. Sometimes with the bigger locals, it's a lot harder to become a journeyman. Plus, I came off of a 4-month contract in Alaska where I made a lot more money than I thought I would. I saved up so that I really wouldn't have to work between September through December. And I tried to just kind of make it a time where I could really focus on school. Essentially made it so that I could say no to work during this time period if I wanted to, but I really love what I do, so I rarely ever did. So speaking of expenses, let's talk about what they kind of were. So in terms of college expenses, that's kind of really messy because, I mean, I do have federal loans and all that kind of stuff, but I also had a lot of grants and scholarships. So upfront, I really only had to pay $931.50 for that entire kind of 4-month period. But those school fees didn't include textbooks or my graduation fee, so at the end of it all, I ended up paying $1,475.47 for those 4 months. It's gonna average it to $369 a month. Gas and car repairs were about $187 a month. So for living expenses, I did a lot of hiking, I did a lot of artsy stuff, so that's kind of what those expenses kind of are, and just other necessities I would need in life. Those were about $475 a month. Pretty much lived at home, so rent was free. Food was sponsored by my mother, so that was really only $148 a month for when I would ever go out and get food on my own. Food and rent is really what she covered, but when I live in Alaska, I'm all on my own. So part 3 is going to kind of show you a better look at those kind of things. I've only really ever lived alone in Alaska, so I really only know what the costs of living are like fully here. So really weird perspective, guys. What else? Cell phone bill was $127 a month. Car insurance was about $146 a month. My car loan cost about $261 a month, but I paid a little bit extra because I ended up paying off that loan before graduating. And I think that's pretty much it for expenses. Actually, every once in a while, I would get like a $200 round trip ticket to Tampa to visit my father. But I think I only did that once or twice. We'll just say it's $100 a month. Putting that all together, expenses were $1,667. And then if I took out any expenses that don't really exist anymore, it would cost me about $1,037 to live at home right now. Can't say that that second number is entirely accurate since I have more time now that I'm not in school to do things. The only time I've really lived at home post-grad was the 2 months between when I finished touring and going to Alaska. So obviously I spent quite a bit doing a lot of different things there. Visited a lot of people, did a lot of low budget traveling. So it is so inconsistent still. Pretty much every 4 months of my life is a different lifestyle where my spending is a difference of thousands sometimes. It's hard to really track it, but I still track it just so that I do have an awareness of what it would be like if I went back to a certain kind of situation. For example, coming back to Alaska, it was really nice to have those wages and expenses from last year to really help me predict what this summer was gonna look like. And also when I am budgeting, I do like to use my Alaska expenses as kind of a general this is probably how much I'm gonna spend per month, just because the cost of living here is this compared to Wisconsin, which is this. But I have different things in different places too. I have a car at home, I don't have a car here. I pay rent here, I don't pay rent at home. It's all up in the air. I'm still young, I'm still trying to figure things out, but at least I have a system that helps me do that. Anyway, this is getting longer than it needs to be. If you want to see part 3 where I talk about my life in Alaska, how much that cost me versus how much I make and all that kind of stuff, go watch that once it comes out. Thank you. Hey guys, I recorded that yesterday, but I forgot to talk about the hourly rates. So I just opened up the contracts for the 4 main venues that I generally find myself working at. So 3 of these are roadhouses and one of them is an arena. For the roadhouse where we get most of our Broadways, the rate is $20 an hour for general stagehands. But I was making $14 an hour when I was an apprentice and the contract was actually just re-ratified. So the apprentice rate is also $20 an hour now. The other big roadhouse is about the same size, half an hour away, gets a lot smaller events, pays $27.50 an hour. Except if you're in wardrobe, you make $30 an hour, whereas the other one, you only make $20 an hour. I do wardrobe sometimes, so I'm including those rates. And then we have a roadhouse. It's about an hour and a half drive away, so the rate is $25 an hour, except we get a 5-hour minimum there instead of a 4-hour minimum like all of our other contracts. Basically, if the venue is 60 miles away or more from Appleton, we are guaranteed a 5-hour minimum just because of the distance that we have to drive. And for the big arena that we get most of our concerts at, the main rate is $22.66 an hour. Like I said, all these venues have a 4 to 5 hour minimum, so regardless of how long or short we work, we still get paid for 4 to 5 hours. And between the hours of midnight and 8 a.m. it's time and a half, and after 8 hours it's also time and a half. A lot of these wages are significantly better than what I was getting last year, but a lot of these contracts were also just re-ratified, or they were bumped up to next year's rate, which was significantly higher than the year before. So they're getting better. They're significantly better than what they were 2 years ago when I first started working with the union. But it's definitely been quite the lengthy negotiation process for some of these. I do make a little bit more in Milwaukee and Madison. I think all those venues generally pay at least $23 an hour for the most part. So I guess in the difference that I'm making for the hours that I'm working, it's kind of just paying for my gas in a sense. And then I think with Milwaukee, you can actually choose not to do retirement and to take that money as kind of a gas thing if you live over, I think it's 60 miles away. I think I live 200 miles away from Milwaukee, I think. A lot of driving and a lot of mornings where you get up at 3 a.m. to be there at an 8 a.m. load-in, or you don't get back until well after the sunrise at 6 or 7 a.m. So it's it's not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. Another thing with it being in Wisconsin is just the nature of the weather too. I don't take any of those Milwaukee or Madison gigs in the wintertime, mostly because I would be driving to work at 3, 4, 5 a.m. and the roads are not always plowed during those times. And I've had instances where I've had to drive home or drive to work in 2 feet of unplowed snow during a blizzard because of just the conditions that are vary across the state depending on where you are in the middle of the country. Yeah, these country roads don't take you home, they take you to heaven. So obviously yeah, you can make it work and some people make it work, but also you are putting yourself in a lot of danger if you do that during certain months of the year. And we do have stagehands that regularly get into accidents every single year because they are driving half asleep on an unplowed road. This is one of the reasons why I took a touring contract during the winter times, just so I wouldn't have to be the one driving and things would be a lot safer in terms of that kind of stuff. Also a more consistent wage. January through March is our dead season. So if I only were to be doing work in Green Bay, I would be making less than $1,000 a month. And that is simply not livable in any society these days. Okay, that's all I really have to say about that. All right, stay spicy, y'all.